Are you a beginner and want to improve your opening play without memorizing a lot of complex lines? Then this video is for you. I will show you 4 simple concepts which will make your opening play much better. The first concept I want to talk about is execute your threat. Often I see some beginners play some opening like this. They attack the pawn on e5, but after that, if the opponent does ignore it, they also ignore what they actually plan to do. They bring the bishop out or something, and the game transposes to some stuff where everybody is just bringing out their pieces after a certain concept. However, sometimes and quite often, the advantage can just be gained if you also execute your threats. There is not so much point to creating a threat if you don't execute it. Of course, you need to take care if there is something wrong with taking something, but in general, the first thing you should consider here is, can I execute my threat? And actually, the answer is yes. You take a key central pawn, which gives you a big advantage. After that, it's much easier for you to build up your center because the opponent's pawn is no longer there. Also, it's not really an issue that the knight is getting under attack here. For example, if the opponent would continue with queen f6, trying to checkmate you on f2, hitting the knight simultaneously. Since we have taken this crucial central pawn, we can just expand in the center with d4, hitting the bishop, safeguarding the knight, and defending the checkmate, and white already has a winning position. So rule number 1, execute your threats. So let's now continue with the second example. Often the opening starts with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, and then people are kind of unsure about whether they need to fear this move knight g5, so they are kind of scared to go knight f6. And at a beginner level, I've often seen this move h6. And now white has an opening advantage because he's just much faster in development. However, I also often saw that this kind of temporal advantage just vanishes in a few moves. For example, white castles, black develops, white goes for his standard stuff, and suddenly black also kind of more or less finishes his development without any too big issues. So that's the point where we will come to opening principle number 2, which is once you have a lead, open up the position. Opening up the position is so crucial because the side which has the more pieces will usually win the fight. So the move to open up the position in those e4 and e5 structures is usually pawn to d4, as it opens up the queen, also creates a threat of taking the pawn on e5, and usually this creates a lot of pressure. I even often saw black just defending this in beginners games. But now we come back to rule number 1. Execute the threat. And actually we can grab a pawn here. We take here, black needs to recapture one or another way, but in any case he will finally lose a pawn. So let's see how. If the pawn takes here, we now open the position. Having more pieces and more threats makes our position much easier, and in fact we can take on d8. Black is forced to recapture one or another way, but in each case, since we have the more attackers, it's only us who can win something, and we win a pawn here. Also in the other line, since we have more attackers, it can just be us who wins something. Black has no attackers, he has just one defender, so again it's us who win something. And this is quite different from the approach we saw previously. When white is going slow, not opening the position, you don't make it count. You have the majority, but you don't let them strike when it's time. So keep this in mind. Open up the position when you have a lead in development. That's it for position number 2. Let's now get to position number 3. Rule number 3. Rule number 3 is don't be too greedy. I will show you this with an example. The game starts off with e4, d5 Scandinavian defense. We take the pawn, because why not? If black takes the queen, we will win a lot of time against the queen. But if black tries to recapture the pawn with the knight, we shouldn't be too greedy, because we have taken this pawn, yes, but still we should not forget about development, and we, in this instance, should give back the pawn somehow, because otherwise we would just give him too much lead in development. Let me show you this. If we were holding on to the pawn with c4, and after pawn to c6, we would say, okay, if I want to keep my pawn, I need to trade it, otherwise he takes. After that, there are a lot of downsides, obviously. First of all, black has gained a lead in development, having two knights out. Also, our pawn structure is a bit unhealthy, because this pawn can never really reach d4, and thus black will also get a huge center quickly. So here black has no problems whatsoever, and he will just get a very active play, opening the position because he has a lead in development, and also just increase his lead in development. And we have this ugly king on d1, and black has fantastic play here. So keep this in mind. You do not always need to keep your extra pawn. Sometimes just don't be greedy. Don't forget about the opening principles. Instead, I think here it's much more practical to play knight to f3, developing. Black can take this pawn, but we get the center first. No problems, standard play, and white is in no trouble and slightly better here. So that's it for principle number 3. Let's now have a look at the 4th principle, which is trade, time versus material. So this is a very versatile concept which can be seen in different contexts. Sometimes you give up some time to take material, but sometimes you also need to give up some material to win back time. Since it's so fluid, it's also quite complex, but at some point you need to get familiar with it. That's why I picked one very classical example to show it. So the game starts off with e4, e5, knight f3 and f6, which is of course a mistake. White can take here as pawn to e5 loses some material after queen h5, but that's not the topic of today. Instead, black could play queen to e7, setting up a nasty trap that after now queen h5, which is a big blunder, white would lose the piece due to queen e4 check with a double attack. So this is if white was too greedy, thinking, okay, I win here immediately, I win the rook in the corner with this knight g6 trick. It's not working, so we shouldn't do it, and we shouldn't fall for it. However, I have often heard students say, but if I just go back, I don't have an advantage. And here I strongly disagree, because I think white has a huge advantage here. And what white is basically doing, he is trading this extra pawn, which he has gained, for some time. Because, okay, black is gaining back the extra pawn. Material is level now, but after bishop e2, black's position is, just very ugly anyway. Because all he has done is brought the queen out like a beginner, put a pawn to f6 like a beginner, don't move the f-pawn, the knight won't be happy, the king won't be happy, and white will get a huge lead in development, because he will gain time against black queen with knight c3. Also, he will gain time with castle and rook e1, creating some threats against the enemy king, which is still on the e-file. So always be aware of that. When you're up a pawn and you cannot keep it in a comfortable way, really be willing to give back the pawn and try to get something else in return, which often can be a lead in development. That's it for rule number 4. If you have any questions, any other principles which I've forgotten or which you like to be discussed here on this channel, please let me know. If you like the video, please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.